So parents ask me all the time, like, what is the most important thing I should do for my child? How do I talk to them? What's the most important thing of this whole process? And I tell people over and over again, the most important thing we can do for kids is to tell the truth. Kids will come up with a story in their own head that oftentimes is worse than the story that actually happened to them.
This is the When You Die podcast. If it has to do with death and dying, we're talking about it. Today's host is Kelly Edwards.
On the When You Die podcast today, we are talking about talking to children about death and grief. I am joined by Jill MacFarlane. Jill is the program director at a place called The Sharing Place. This is a place that offers grief support for families, children, and teens. The Sharing Place is in Salt Lake City in Utah. Hello, Jill.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. This is not an easy topic that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
It definitely isn't. I hear that all the time from people. How do you do what you do? That seems so complicated. Really, kids are so open and intelligent and articulate. The kids really make my job easy.
Let's talk a little bit about the Sharing Place itself. The purpose of this is to provide that safe space.
Absolutely. The Sharing Place is a grief support program. We do not provide counseling or therapy in any form. We provide a safe place for kids to come together with other kids their same age who've had similar circumstances. And really, our whole goal at the Sharing Place is to make sure that kids do not grieve alone. We do lots of work surrounding emotional identification, appropriate emotional expression, learning coping skills, preserving memories. All of those things are happening in our group as well. But our main goal is to make sure that no one's grieving alone.
Who comes to the Sharing Place? Like, how does this start the process?
Our only requirement at the Sharing Place is that kids come to the Sharing Place after grieving the death of a family member. Families are loosely defined. I do not define families for kids. And so they come to us for all sorts of deaths, whether it be mom, dad, brother, sister, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, close friends, neighbors, whoever was a supportive person in that child's life. Kids can come to our groups from ages 3 to 18. So we really span that whole development piece for the kids. They can come to us at any point in their childhood. And we don't have requirements for income or background or type of death or any of that. It's just strictly grief from death.
When a child comes to you, everything that you do is also age appropriate, right? Like, you're breaking them into groups of their own age.
Yeah, and we do that specifically because we know that kids grieve differently as they go through different developmental levels. And so we really want to put them in a group that meets their developmental needs. We know we're not doing kids any good if we're not using words and talking about concepts and all of those things that they can understand and really assimilate appropriately and understand and be able to move through that process of where they're at that point in time.
And it's not just for the kids either, because there's parenting while grieving, right?
Absolutely.
You help the parents get this subject out there. And I think we talked about this earlier, and the most important thing is normalizing.
Absolutely. So while our kids are in group, their parents all meet together in a parent group. We separate the kids and parents on purpose because we know everybody needs their own space to grieve appropriately and developmentally appropriately. And so the parents really spend a lot of their time not only focusing on their own grief and not feeling like they're alone in their grief, they talk a ton about how do we parent these kids? Is this a teenage issue or is this a grief issue? There's a really fine line between those two things. And so it's really amazing to have other parents who are going through it as well to talk it through and get advice and bounce ideas off of each other. So we absolutely serve the whole family. We really believe at the Sharing Place we're not serving kids appropriately if we're not serving their whole family. So we really try to include that parent portion and education in it as well.
And as parents, the natural inclination is to protect the child.
Yeah.
But we all know that that is not necessarily what you're doing if you're keeping it from them or if you're not allowing them to express themselves.
So parents ask me all the time, like, what is the most important thing I should do for my child? How do I talk to them? What's the most important thing of this whole process? And I tell people over and over again, the most important thing we can do for kids is to tell the truth. Kids will come up with a story in their own head that oftentimes is worse than the story that actually happened to them. And while I absolutely recognize that talking to kids about hard things like drugs, suicide, mental illness, all of those hard things, that's really hard. But kids cannot process what has happened to them unless they know the truth about it. Also, there's a really great chance kids are smart in their social media and cousins and families and all of these things, neighbors, school kids that may have heard the truth. Kids may find out about the truth from someone other than you, and that can damage some really serious trust issues for kids and their parents. If you haven't told the truth about the biggest thing that's ever happened to them, what else have you not told them the truth about? So it's so important to tell the kids the truth, regardless of how hard that story is.
How do you find the kids respond?
Normally they're just like, oh, okay. They just take it. I said in the very beginning, they take it so gracefully, and they need to know that you trust them with hard information as well. We trust that they can do this. We trust that you can handle this. That's a difficult question to answer because every kid has their own personality. But for the most part, kids just take it for what it is and say, okay. Some kids may ask a ton of questions, and you need to answer those questions honestly as they come. And some kids will just take it as, okay, my dad died by suicide. I get it. And let's move on.
I know you're going to get feedback from parents, and there's probably a great range of how someone is when they first come to you and how someone is when they've completed a program.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that relief is a big thing here.
Yeah, absolutely. We just actually had a family this week who was finally able to tell their kids about the suicide. And it felt like a huge weight was lifted off this mom's shoulders because she's been working so hard to keep the secret from these kids for so long that it was just a huge weight that we can finally talk about how it is and what really happened and be able to move forward. When you add complication of trying to keep secrets and hide things, that's really big and heavy to carry.
Talk a little bit about the words that we need to use. Do you have something that is sort of a standard conversation or verbiage that you know that these are the words that we should really make sure that we hit?
So the words that we always use at the sharing place are dead and died. We always need to say the words dead and died. If we're using soft, kind words for that, passed away, went to heaven, lives with Jesus, all of those things, that can be really confusing, especially when we're talking about very young children. I hear oftentimes from families that they're worried that their 4-year-old's suicidal because they're saying all the time, I want to go live in heaven with daddy. And it's not that your child's suicidal, it's just that they lack that developmental and cognitive ability to comprehend what heaven is. Heaven's just like Disneyland, right? We can go to Disneyland and we can come back from Disneyland. And if dad went to heaven, I'll go to heaven. And so it's so important that we use the words dead and died. If we can't even say the words dead and died, then we have a real problem about processing what's happened to us in the first place. We have to be able to say those words because that's really what happened to our person. They died. The other thing is when talking about how somebody died, it's really important that we use words that kids can understand. Kids don't understand complex medical terms. They don't understand big diagnoses and things like that. So I tend to talk about what actually happened to the body to make it stop working. So for example, your grandma died from a heart attack, which means her heart stopped beating and it could not move the blood through her body anymore. And that made her body stop working. So that's a very simple, concrete explanation of what a heart attack is that a kid can understand. It's really important that we tell them what happened to the body and why the body died so that they can understand that it wasn't a cause of anything that they did. We have a classic story here at the sharing place of this. One of our families had their father die from a heart attack, and the family used the words, his heart was broken. His heart was broken. But little did they know that early that day, their daughter was 8 years old and she had gotten in trouble for not cleaning her room. And so she felt that her dad was mad at her for not cleaning her room and she caused the broken heart. So if we had just explained what a heart attack was in words that she could understand, we would have avoided all of this guilt and shame and heartache that this little girl had, because there's no way that she caused that heart attack. And it's so important for kids to understand that cause and effect of something made the body stop working.
Now, I think kids have sort of an understanding just through nature. There's the dying of leaves or plants. There's oftentimes a pet is the first death that they've dealt with. When children particularly come to you, do they have that awareness, that basic awareness? Or do you ever have cases where they're so completely kept in the dark?
There are some families or some children who are totally in the dark. It's usually our very youngest children starting at age 3. They just don't have that concept of what dead means. It's kind of an abstract term, right? You step on the ants outside and they're dead, but that doesn't really have cause and effect in your life. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard to understand. It's usually our very youngest kids that have a hard time understanding that. So for those kids, we repeat over and over again. Dead is when your body stops working. Anytime I talk to a child in that preschool age, if they say to me, oh, sometimes kids are really verbal and they'll say, my daddy died from cancer. And I'll just repeat, yeah, his body stopped working, because I'm trying to reinforce that his body stopped working. That's what dead means.
And does it become then a normal thing for them?
Yeah, it does. And once kids get a little bit older, just developmentally, younger kids are trying to understand what dead means and just what happened to them. And then older kids in the elementary school age range, they're trying to figure out how things happen. And so once you realize, oh, wait, if my dad died, that means my mom could die too. And that means my grandma could die. And that means my best friend could die. And so it does become a big subject for them of this life and death cycle. Until it's introduced to you in your life, it's not a normal thing. That's the other great thing about the sharing place, is that everybody here has had this happen to them. It's a normal part of life. And usually for young kids, they don't have that happen. And so they just feel so odd. They feel so out there. They're alone. And the sharing place really normalizes that everybody is going to have somebody die at some point in their lifetime.
And even with small children, so you have a group who are in the same age, and some may have been there a little bit earlier than others. Do you find that those kids will help the newcomers?
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of group work and at the sharing place, we're an open-ended program. So families can come to us when they want and stay as long as they want to. So in any particular group, I might have a child who is 2 months out of their death, and I might have a child who is 5 years out of their death. And there's this natural mentoring process of, wow, look how far I could go. And wow, look how far I've come. And it's this really incredible thing to watch when a brand new family is here at the sharing place and they can't even say the words, my dad died. And I have other families who've been here for a while who can talk about their person and remember their person. And they have those words and that comfort behind them because they've practiced it so much at the sharing place. And it's just such a really neat environment to realize, wow, I can do that too. I can get there too.
So not everyone has access to a sharing place. If you were to give advice to parents in terms of activities and things that they can do to help that process, what were some things that you would suggest?
The number one thing that I always suggest is keep that person in your daily lives. Keep that door open to be able to talk about them. If we say, oh, that's too painful, I don't want to put salt in the wounds, those kinds of things, and shut the door on talking about our person, that's really hard for a child to process what's happened to them. So if we can keep that person alive in our every single daily life in simple ways, like if I cook spaghetti for dinner, I could say, wow, remember how much better your mom cooked spaghetti? She was way better at it than I am. Just in little ways of keeping that door open to allow kids to both remember their person and talk about their person. I recommend that all the time to everybody. And then also, it's really important to follow the child's lead. Sometimes they might not want to talk and they might just be having a quiet day, and that is allowed. That's okay. And so follow your child's lead on what they want and what they need. If they want to talk about their person, please talk about it. If they need a minute, please let them have a minute. One thing that we forget to do as adults is realize that kids can control their own emotions if we let them. And so it's really important to follow their lead and let them have some control in a situation that they have no control over.
And I think of how difficult it must be for a parent who's also grieving.
Oh, yeah.
Along with them, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest job on earth, is to parent when you're grieving. When you are having a hard time even controlling your own emotions and getting out of bed yourself, how do you get three little kids out of bed and off to school on time and keeping grades up and extracurriculars up? It's a really challenging job. So I always just tell parents, give yourself some grace. If you can do one thing that day, you've done one thing, and give yourself some grace and realize that this is hard and you have permission for it to be hard.
What does a group look like? What are some of the things that they do within the groups?
So we always start our sharing place groups with what we call a check-in. We answer 4 questions in check-in. We say our name, we say the person who died, we say how they died, and then we answer a question that's different about them every time. Like, what was your person's hair color? Or what was their favorite food? What is the ultimate birthday present you could ever buy for your person? We do check-in because it helps kids practice talking about their person. That can be really hard to do. It can be really hard to say, my dad died and he died from suicide. And so if you can practice it in a safe place, like the sharing place with other kids who are saying the same thing, it's really an amazing thing. So we do check in to practice talking about our person, to normalize talking about our person, and to kind of set the tone for the night and help kids remember why we're here at the sharing place. We always do a structured activity as well. These activities are helping us with emotional identification, appropriate expression, coping skills. So we may do something like a journal entry for our person. We could write a letter to our person and burn it in our fire pit in the backyard. We could do some sort of art with our kids for memory preservation. We could make luminaires, or we could do any kind of activity like that. Our activities are always around our memories of our person and our feelings and experiences. So it's some sort of expression of our memory or a feeling that we do. And then after we do that structured work, we always give kids free time to just play, because we want them to just be kids with other kids who've been through what they've been through. And they do some really incredible expression through their play. We know that's how kids process emotion. So they just have free time. At our facility, we're really lucky because we have a freestanding house, and every room in our basement is dedicated to a different form of play. We have a volcano room, which is a padded room, and we've got big yoga balls. We have a big stuffed person, and that's where we express those big feelings of grief. We can punch things without hurting people. We can have wild and crazy energy without hurting ourselves or hurting things around us. So we use the volcano room a lot. We have an art room where we do lots of artwork. We have a soft room where we have all of our babies and dress ups. And then we have an active play room with dinosaurs and Legos and trucks and things like that.
And I think that's the main thing. There's 2 things that I'm taking from this. One is to follow the lead of the child, and also just to let whatever form they want to use to express.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Younger kids express grief with a lot of energy. I hear that a lot from families. Like, I can't get them to sit still, or they ran around at the funeral like wild people. Emotions are big, and we know that as adults. We can feel those in our bodies, but as adults, we have that emotional recognition. Kids don't have that. So those big, huge emotions come out in crazy energy. And so they need a safe place to run around and express some of that emotion that's built up inside them.
And there's a phrase that you've used a couple of times, which is emotional identification.
Mhm.
What is that?
So, emotional identification, the way we use it at the sharing place, is recognizing what we're feeling and why we're feeling it. And then coming up with a coping skill to help us deal with that emotion. So, I'm feeling sad because my dad died and I really miss him today. Or I'm feeling frustrated because my mom wasn't able to be at my choir concert at school. Or I'm feeling confused because I don't really understand why my dad did all those drugs. We can have multiple emotions at one time. And sometimes it just comes out as, I don't know. I don't know how I'm feeling. Or I'm just angry. I'm angry all the time. Well, maybe it's not just all anger. If we can sort through the different emotions we have and tie it to something, that can help the kids really sort out a coping skill to help with those things.
In terms of age groups, would you say kind of processes this a little easier than the others? Is it with the older kids or is it with the younger kids?
Ooh, that's a really tough question.
Yeah.
The younger kids process it so matter of factly, which I think is really helpful. Little kids tell everybody. They tell the checker at the grocery store, yep, my mom's dead. And it's just a thing, and they can just cope with it and talk about it and move on. However, as they get a little bit older and they start to think about the whys behind it, it becomes more complicated for them. But teenagers also have this great resilience built into them that younger kids don't have, that they can see who they want to be and they can make choices and dedicated choices that little kids don't have. So that's a hard question to answer. I think every age group has their positives and negatives.
And when you were talking about teenagers, there's a whole other physical thing and emotional thing that's going on just in being a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Being a grieving teenager is rough stuff for
yeah.
sure.
How do you help parents identify that? Or is there a way to identify it?
There really isn't, because the range is wide for teenagers. And so it depends on the personality of the child, the coping skills, the resilience, how the parents are coping. There's so many things that go into it that I can't really just say, well, teens do best with A, B, or C,
Right.
because there's so many things that go into it. I think when I say follow the child's lead and give them some control, that especially needs to happen in the teenage years. We need to listen to what they need, and we need to back off on the advice giving of, you know what you should do? I know it's going to make you feel better, right? Because for those teens, no one knows what they're feeling and no one is like them. And so when we come in and we're like, I know just what you need, they automatically get on the defense and shut down all listening. So if you can follow the lead and give control to any of these age groups, teenagers are the ones that need it most.
And one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier, which I think is so lovely, is that you are very volunteer focused.
Yeah, we are. Our program has one staff member in each group. We run about 25 groups a month at two separate locations here in Salt Lake City. So I have one staff member that runs the group, does the admin work, does all the documentation and all those things. But I have about 5 volunteers in each of those groups under that staff member. And our volunteers are the ones who really sit with the kids and listen to the kids. They don't do any sort of guiding or leading. Their main job at the sharing place is just to listen. They're just there to ride along with that kid. We tell our volunteers all the time, it does not take somebody special. It does not take letters behind your name or certain education. What it takes is somebody willing to walk beside these kids. We're not leading, we're not guiding, we're not pushing them off a cliff. We're just simply walking beside them in their grief. And our volunteers do that in such a beautiful way. They show up for these kids every single week. It's really incredible to watch.
I think that's a really lovely concept to anybody, even to parents who are also grieving, is that walking alongside. It's a great image of that way to help.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it takes a lot of pressure off of not the griever, but the people who are trying to help the griever. It takes so much pressure off. You're never going to say the right thing to somebody to make this better for them. There's not a perfect magic phrase to make them feel better. But if we can sit beside them and listen, what better gift can we give them?
So many people have that. We hear it a lot. Just show up, just be present. Doesn't matter what age.
Nope, it doesn't. The kids that come to group, even the little kids, they may not know my volunteers' names, but they know, hey, wait a minute, where's that one lady with the brown hair? Right? Because they know there's going to be somebody here to play with them, to listen to them, and to talk about their person with them.
It must be a very rewarding thing for you and for the rest of your group when someone comes to you in one stage and the beginning, and to see that advancement and the progress. And it's got to be something that's so fulfilling.
It really is. Like I said in the very beginning, people ask me all the time, how do you do this job? That's so sad. And it really isn't. These families have really sad stories, but it is not a sad job to walk beside them, because I get to see them to start to smile again. And I get to see them share memories and to heal and to find a new normal. They're never going to be the same person they were before this death happened, but to find their new normal and to be able to witness that is really a privilege that I get to do every single day.
It's so lovely. Now, I am so grateful that you have some time here to talk, because it is, as I said, it's so important, and it's something that probably one of the biggest things that we see is that hopelessness in parents and the fear of hurting their child further.
Yeah.
And so the importance of just, as we say, normalizing, listening, talking about it. They also don't have to wait until someone has died to start
Oh,
the conversation.
yeah. I hate to break it to you and all of your listeners, but no one is immune from this. You're all going to experience this at some point in your life. And so the more we can talk about it, the better. We could talk about grief and bereavement the way that we talk about bullying or drug use or sex education, all of those things, the more prepared our kids are going to be. Kids just in general have this sense of, well, that will never happen to me, right? That's why so many teenagers get in car accidents because they think they're invincible. But the more we talk about it and prepare them for what's coming, the more coping skills they'll have in their toolbox for when those hard things happen.
You're seeing a big demand for this service as well. I mean, you've opened a second location, as you mentioned,
Yep.
and there's a wait list.
There's a wait list for our program. We consistently have a wait list for our program. The statistics in Utah are that 1 in 14 children will experience the death of a person, a family member, before they turn 18. And we have a lot of kids in Utah, so there's a lot of kids here. The statistics vary from state to state, and that information is available for you. I think that it's something that's not going away, and the more that we can support kids and get them through this process in an appropriate way, the better. We're currently working on opening a third location here in Utah as well because the demand is so high.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much. I know that it is a busy thing for you, and I appreciate it because it's something that we all need to really start looking at. I think that this will be very helpful for those who don't have a sharing place to be able to go to.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. If I can just close with one thought, the one thought that I like to tell everybody that I talk to about my work is that grief is a normal and natural reaction to loss. And I think that's so important for us to remember as parents when we're talking to our kids. They do need to grieve. And I know it's so hard to watch and it's so hard to go through, and I'm not taking that away, but they should be grieving. They should have some sort of signs of grief, and that's normal and that's okay. We have to be able to feel it to move through it. So to protect our kids and try and hide them from it, we're not doing our kids any favors because we do want them to have a normal and natural reaction to the things that's happened to them.
Some good advice. Thank you, Jill, and good luck with the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
This conversation is brought to you by the When You Die Project. From existential afterlife questions to palliative care and the nuts and bolts of green burial, if it has to do with death, we're talking about it. WhenYouDie.org